Good afternoon. Here on Likable Science here on ThinkTech Hawaii, broadcasting from the ThinkTech studios in Pioneer Plaza, live streaming network here. We're excited to have you join us on Likable Science, where we're trying to help people understand that science, technology, engineering, and math can all be fascinating, intriguing parts of all of our lives. And to help us in that task today, we have guests here in the studio and joining us by Skype. In the studio with me here is Mike Usmar, who is the Chief Executive Officer of High Tech Youth Network. And joining us by Skype today are two people, John Thatcher and Kris, both of Studio Shaka in Hilo, Hawaii. Thank you all for joining me.
It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting us in. That's great.
Very glad you can be here. So let's just jump right into this. Mike, can you tell me what this High Tech Youth Network really is?
Yep. It's for us. First of all, for us, we're really focused on community development. So we want to see meaningful change that's both educational, social, and meaningful to the community. So principally, that's our focus. We're not just education or just investing in kids' lives. And so the network itself, it's really focusing on the lifelong learning of young people between age 3 to 25, particularly in those in underserved communities and the hardest to reach communities from right at the bottom of the world, which is where I come from, so I'm putting it out there right away. I apologize for my accent, and it's not Australian, it's New Zealand, Aotearoa, New Zealand, right throughout the Pacific. And so our network consists of really supporting kids in their lifelong learning. And we have sort of 5 elements to that. The network, which connects both our adult mentors and our young people together. Our studios, so we have high-tech studios, and that's where our staff are over there, and they can talk about that in a moment. So the studios are locations in communities around the Pacific. We have academies, so that's helping kids get credentials. And then the 4th element is our tech sheds, which is social enterprising. And our 5th element, which we'll talk about a little bit later, I guess, is research. So yeah, those are the 5 things, but pushing all of that lifelong learning for young people right from elementary right through to becoming rocket scientists.
Wow, sounds very ambitious.
There we go.
Excellent. Well, I know the studios lie very much at the heart of your work, and are sort of the places where a lot of this stuff sort of takes place, and the kids gather and do these things. So maybe John and or Kris can tell us a little bit about sort of what the studio there in Hilo is like, and a bit about what they do there.
Well, right now the studios might be a little bit loud for a minute or so. Kids are just leaving the regular school program. The studio is located in the Kris building in the old site of Hilo, and it shares the space with Connections Public Charter School. Connections is a K-12 public charter school. In the Kris building, we have our kindergarten through 8th grade students. So after school, we operate the Studio Shaka program on the 2nd floor of the Kris building, and it is primarily serving students from 6th grade through 12th grade. Part of the philosophy of our program is that kids need to have choices in what they do. And this is a free program. We don't charge anything. We try to provide meaningful choices for the students to be able to really explore and develop their talents in areas, a number of different areas. But our primary focus, at least initially right now, is music, video. What else are we doing? We're doing a lot of music and video production right now. The kids also have opportunities to do things. In music, some kids are playing music, some kids are learning how to play different instruments, some kids are focusing on dancing or singing. And on the video side, there are some that are more interested in the gaming, some that are interested in programming, some in video production. So we really try to find things that the kids have a high interest in and get them to start developing their skills and their talents in those areas.
Well, excellent. That sounds so. It's very much a sort of a learner-driven environment then, where the individual student and youth interests determine what gets done within your sort of context and constraints, of course.
Yeah, and sometimes it's associated with things that are happening in school. Like we have a makery also that's available for kids to use in the after-school program. And I'm not sure how familiar you are with the makery. Neil Scott out of Manoa is actually he just opened a commercial makery in Hilo, and we are working in association with him to give our students experiences that we really consider to be like workforce development. And so kids have access to 3D printers, laser cutters, a lot of the software that's used to interface with the CNC machines. And we actually have kids that are at the level where they are going to be employed in the commercial makery, either when they graduate or in the summers or during breaks.
Well, that sounds top notch. That means then you've got you're taking these kids and showing them, and they're living out the applicability of science and STEM learning into their lives, and seeing the value of understanding how to, for instance, build a musical instrument or design a computer program or what have you, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, like here is a steel guitar that was made by some of our students. It's a Hawaiian steel guitar, and we originally started with the makery about 4 years ago, and this is the design that some of the students were producing. The problem was that none of the kids knew how to play a steel guitar. So we were scouting for someone to teach them, and we managed to get a good, we managed to get a few people like Cyril Pahinui that have been able to come in and work with the kids and really inspire them to take, the steel guitar to levels that we never thought some of our kids would get to. And so now you've got kids that are 15, 16, even younger, that are actually really good at playing the steel guitar. And one group of them has a Hawaiian band that even gets paid for playing at functions.
Excellent. Again, another nice example of sort of learning skills that are applicable then in the outside world. So that brings us actually to a whole other aspect that I wanted to ask Mike about, which is the sort of the cultural aspect, how this high-tech youth network works to help sort of promote and preserve and make dynamic the cultures which in some cases have been a little bit sort of perhaps in danger of disappearing. So you tie in old people, older folks, elders, experience, wisdom with the energy of the youth. And
yeah. I mean, again, it's sort of where I punctuate right at the beginning, that we situate our learning in the context of community, as opposed to a lab or even a textbook. And as John said, it's inspired often by the interest of the context of that community. And so part of that community obviously is aspects of your culture, the resources around you, and the institutions, and also the knowledge that has come before all of that. I mean, for me, when you think about science, when you look at the Socratic way of learning, where in the days where science was debated in a forum, it was in thousands of years ago when you saw science being in the community as opposed to an institution. It was there as a public course of debate, and then it was applied to your circumstances in your life. And so for us, we see technology as not necessarily being the gadgets and the computers and the latest piece of hardware or software. Technology is that art and the crafting of that creativity. Yeah, and we think about also the theory that goes in behind all that. one of our driving, I guess, inspirations is a chap called Professor Mitch Resnick and also Seymour Papette from MIT Media Labs. And they said, you know, for us, learning has to be a social experience. And when we create learning together, we share it together and we talk about it, we socialize it, and it becomes meaningful. And out of that, you get motivation to learn and learn. If that learning is out of context, out of your context, then a lot of our kids will disengage. And it's probably the reason why, in particular in Indigenous communities, and in particularly in underserved communities, we're seeing less and less interest in STEM. Although we've sort of added to STEM now, we kind of like the word stream. So we're using science, technology, the resources, that's the stuff around us, engineering, arts, and math. And so we talk about stream now as opposed to just STEM, and so we're one step ahead of what we think the Department of Education is talking about.
Well, that's excellent. I had heard of STEAM, and STEMs, including social science, but STREAM is a new one on me.
STREAM is another one, because the resources, when you're connecting your science to your resources, the water, to the environment around you, when you're connecting your resources like the wood that's been created from that's going into those steel guitars, then science not only becomes very applicable and pragmatic, but then you can bring in the people that understand those resources, so your elders, and they can sit with our kiki, with our children, and talk story with them, and so they become the scientists, not the teachers or the experts. And then that conversation that goes on is the learning that Seymour Papette talks about, that we create artifacts, digital artifacts, technology that is socialized and talked about, and then we capture the learning. And maybe that's in an oral tradition, maybe that's in a physical artifact, maybe that is what I saw on Hilo on Wednesday night, kids actually performing that science, you know, and that's quite in the contrast to situating science in a test where you have an hour to, you know, offload all your knowledge, and then you leave the room. For us, it's iterative, it's ongoing, but most of all, it's going to add value to the lives of us. Because by and large, where we're working across the Pacific, there isn't a lot of institutions, there isn't a lot of resources. And so our key resource here is actually our people. And one of our goals as a network is to reconnect our Pacific people, our Māori, our Aboriginal communities from the top of Canada right to South America. We're just talking quietly now in Australia. We've got projects in Fiji. But get that conversation going, create the learning. Because with technology, the other thing too is it's constantly evolving. And so once you publish your course tomorrow, it's going to be very different. So for us, a network makes sense where we connect learners together. So it's going back to that whole view that science is something that's done in that forum, that's done in all those things that we're seeing that the internet can lead us to now of collaboration and sharing. And so that's the value that we push here.
Wow, that's pretty amazing.
There we go.
There's quite a symbiosis then, what we're saying, between the culture promoting the science and the science promoting the culture.
Absolutely.
And both sort of feeding on and feeding into one another.
That's right. And I mean, and we don't, by no means are we suggesting that Western culture Western science has no place in an Indigenous community in the middle of the Pacific. But what we are saying, and some of the research suggests, that if we embed that cultural knowledge, that we link cultural knowledges with technology first, and we create these kids that I'm seeing in Hilo and projects all around the Pacific with such a hunger for learning that they'll go out and find that knowledge as well. So they will start with cultural knowledges, and then it flows into things like math and science and engineering beyond their context. But most of the research is suggesting to us now that unless you get that cultural knowledge sorted out as a baseline, particularly your language and in ways that are meaningful in your community, then some of the learning outcomes that our Department of Education are asking our kids to achieve doesn't seem to work out so well. And there's some great research just done recently by Dr. Anne Milne from Aotearoa, New Zealand, that there's now putting some science into getting those cultural knowledges sorting out, particularly with that wider context of not only linguistics but also that science, technology, arts and maths. Yeah.
Well, this is very exciting. We're going to have to take a little break here. I'm Ethan Allen. We're on Likable Science. My guests here are Mike Usmar and John Thatcher, and Kris are joining us by Skype from Studio Shaka in Hilo. We'll be back shortly.
I'm Hong Jiang, host for Asia in Review on Tuesdays.
And I'm David Day, host for Asian Review on Thursdays. Both of us broadcast our respective shows at 4 p.m.
And my topics tend to deal with questions related to environment, culture, history, and sometimes human rights.
And my shows tend to be on international business, foreign policy, geopolitics, and national security. And you can watch our shows live on the ThinkTech website at thinktechhawaii.com.
And you can also watch us on YouTube or Lilo.
So come join us on Thursdays at 4 p.m. I'm David Day.
And on Tuesdays at 4 p.m., I'm Hong Jiang.
Aloha.
Aloha.
We're back on Likable Science on ThinkTech Hawaii, live streaming from the studio at Pioneer Plaza. Joining me today in the studio here is Mike Usmar, the CEO of High Tech Youth Network, and joining us on Skype are John Thatcher and Kris from Studio Shaka in Hilo, Hawaii. We're talking about how High Tech Youth Network connects youth and sort of builds and promotes cultures. So I'd like maybe to jump into the next piece here and really get a look. We've talked now a lot about what what HTYN does. You went over the various sort of parts and aspects. We saw a little bit of some of the products in the studio that have been produced there. We have a video that you gave us, which, you know, in a sense gives us, I think, maybe even a better view, because it's the kids themselves who are the participants, the experts.
To get the experts to talk, yeah.
Right. So maybe we can go to that video and see what's going on here.
At 3 o'clock the bell will go and I'll be at the door. I'll be straight in there to get myself a computer.
You can kick back and like do things that nowadays teenagers are into.
All my projects that I make, I go stick in my room and in the lounge.
And the skills I learn here has helped me through my schooling as well. And all my projects are not simple, they're more advanced and stuff.
I have cool ass friends. They support me with everything we do. We just learn from each other. And it challenges me to do harder stuff, try harder things, like learning how to use new programs, like After Effects.
I really want to like upgrade all my Photoshop skills and like my designing skills and stuff.
It makes me feel more responsible, and that's what I've learned here. Become more responsible of myself and what I do.
It's really important to be who you are.
Studying Bachelor of Design, majoring in digital design at AUT.
Going to uni, like because I want to be a magazine designer.
I'm trying my best to go as much as I can back. You know, they did a lot for me, so like I'm back mentoring now, helping out our members.
I see my future being colourful and bright and happy.
So I see like movies and everything, you know. I think to myself, yeah, that could be my name in the credits, you know, I edited this.
Makes me feel good that I'm in control, no one else.
There's still amazing things happening, coming out of our youth, our members, yeah.
And we're back. Ethan Allen here on Likable Science. My guest Mike Usmar with me here in the studio, and our guest via Skype from Studio Shaka in Hilo. So that was an amazing video, Mike. You say that it was basically entirely produced by the kids in the studio. So in a sense, that video is a product and is the kind of thing that kids can do. And what struck me there was these are the kids are very reflective about what this experience has meant to them, and they see what the potential of what this can mean to them, how it can impact them. So that's developing, I think, a real maturity in thinking. That's very powerful.
And a love of learning, you know. And so when young people are allowed to when they come into a studio, typically it's not like teachers up the front, and we call them educators. They can build on other ideas that they're interested in, and so it doesn't surprise us, to be fair, that they turn out outstanding pieces of work. But around there, we're scaffolding new knowledge, and so yep, they might come in and produce, look at an idea with a video, but then they realize that they don't know how to code or to produce editing, and so they'll call in some of their friends. Often, if we have staff, you'll never see the staff because they're down at the level of the kids, and so you'll scaffold ideas out. So it might start with a simple movie, and then they start animating, so then they need to learn about animation skills, but also things like complex problem solving around how do we solve issues. Again, all those to start from a simple idea and get scaffolded up to quite amazing stuff. And so you have this, along that way, kids experiencing confidence and the next step of confidence until they become rock stars. And so they confront TV and front movies, and as I say, we don't do marketing, our organization. We just say, you know, here's an idea, go crazy, and then this is what happens. We get videos like this.
Well, excellent. And Kris, Mike was telling me that you've got some very exciting projects going there that sort of exemplify these ideas he was just talking about in Hilo. Can you maybe describe a little more of that?
Yeah, you know, we recently started partnering up with the city, and we believe that we have a kuleana, or a responsibility to the area that we're in. When Mike was talking about resources, you know, we identify the resources here in our area. We are a public charter school in the state of Hawaii who has an after-school program called Studio Shaka, located right in the middle of downtown. So we have a really unique situation. And one of the great things that happened for our city in the beginning of 2014, we won a contest from Benjamin Moore called Main Street Matters. And what that did is we won this contest. So they are repainting the entire, they're giving downtown Hilo a facelift, and they're completely repairing and painting the downtown Hilo area. And so our students are seeing this transformation take place, and they got excited. And so some of them had an idea to go out and take pictures of the before and after of the renovations. And then that got them interested in, you know, what downtown Hilo is full of old buildings. It's kind of old Hawaii. And so they've been finding out and researching a lot of these historic buildings. And they started a project called Downtown Hilo Project. And it is absolutely amazing. They showcased it to Mike Usmar and John Thatcher and I 2 days ago here in Hilo. And we were absolutely wowed by these. One was an 11th grade high school student, and the other was an 8th grade middle school student, revealing this project to us, and we were absolutely just blown away, because one of the things that we do believe, it's one thing to teach community, it's another thing to live community. And that's what we see with our students, is that they have, again, taken the personal responsibility and made it their community.
And the project is they coded a website, so they had the website up. They had to use cameras to take pretty good photos. They did the research of historic photos, and I mean, I don't know these young boys, but we couldn't shut them up. You know, they just wanted to talk, and you know, they were generally excited about the projects that they had. And I think the challenge that we have is that we want to add value to the learning that's going on in John's school and wherever we locate these studios, and we hope that becomes infectious for these kids and becomes a real resource for teachers to be able to build on that as well.
Yeah, it gets back to what you were saying earlier about instilling a love of learning. Once you get kids loving to learn, then you can't stop them from learning. They'll start asking questions. Their curiosity just goes everywhere. They see something new and they immediately want to know why, how, what happened here, and they know they've got the tools in their own heads to research it and to find out.
That's right, and I mean, moving that whole abstract of science and math from being something on a page that's something you can blow up, something that, this story, when our studio first one that we had in New Zealand, I thought I was being fun by buying the studio a robotic vacuum cleaner that went off and did its own vacuum cleaning by itself. I came back the following day and it was pulled apart. You know, these kids had got their screwdrivers out and they wanted to know how this vacuum cleaner was doing. It didn't go back together so well, but that's where science is, you know. It's this inquisitive mind that once you've got that learning, just building. And I mean, I often hear you talk about that all of us are scientists, that we should all be engineers. It's in that living of it that we need to restore that memory of.
Exactly, and every culture around the world has this. It takes different forms in different cultures, different pieces get emphasized. Yes. And a lot of Pacific Island cultures are very closely tied to the islands and the ocean, obviously. But and so it's wonderful then to see these kids sort of bringing this back in, feeding this life into these cultures, and at the same time preparing themselves to go out and be successful global citizens here.
Yeah, and I think our hope, Ethan, is to really validate the science that's in situ of those communities and those cultures, that it has perpetuated those communities, and by communities, we're talking about distant, remote islands. Even when you've got islands in the Micronesia, even though you might have a main island, there's thousands of islands in some cases, and so they're quite remote. And I think our network is doing something a little different, is that we're reconnecting the learners back together. And to be fair, we couldn't have really done that 10 years ago. The technology for us that's enabled us to do that is really is really helping us move this network so faster. I mean, we'll have the staff and kids connecting to each other on video conferencing all the time. I mean, right behind John and Christy, you'll see a screen on the wall. We purposely got HD TVs so that kids could see, you know, what time they went to bed last night and how tired they might look, that they see them in all their HD glory. Because for our Pacific people or for Indigenous people, but for even you and I think it's really important that we're not just seeing something on a screen, that we're seeing these people in person. And so we make a commitment as a network too to bring kids together in real world. Kris and John have come to Aotearoa, New Zealand. Next year we're hopefully bringing a big contingent of youth from the studios around the Pacific to spend time at a camp as well. So that learning is virtual, it's in situ with the community, but then the big wide Pacific-wide community, we create this cohort of learners together as well.
Yeah, it's a very Pacific attitude, whereas it's the Western attitude of the Pacific Islands as being separated by the ocean. The Pacific Island attitude is that islands are joined by the ocean.
Yeah.
And your network is sort of being a new waves on the ocean, as it were.
Yeah, and I mean, that challenge has often been in economies of scale. So when you've got remote islands that may only have a population of 2,500, the resources or the ability to connect with them was so hard and so expensive. So the technology has gone down, the price has gone down. But when you start aggregating a population of 4,000 to 5,000 young Pacific Island Māori Aboriginal community together through this technology, we have a phenomenal learning cohort now of learners. And so we literally, that's why I'm saying our learning is very iterative and very dynamic, that every day we're adding value to it. We're capturing it online as well now, so very shortly we just have just a final beta testing of a big system that's allowing us to push all the artifacts up online so that every young person in the network, whether they're in South America to the top of Canada, can connect and talk about artifacts, share ideas. And for us, there's a social networking side of it for sure, but if a young person's going to like a project that, say, somebody's created a project in Studio Shaka and one of our young people in a studio in New Zealand likes it, they need to explain why they like it. So they're unpacking the learning as well. And so these young people will have other young people peer reviewing their work, and that is where some of that academic rigor and science that sits in the Western culture can complement some of the things that we do. And behind all too, we're getting massive amounts of data. So we're in a really unique position where we can aggregate not only the learners, the artifacts, but the data that's going in behind all that as well.
Sounds extraordinarily powerful and really bring the sort of a win-win situation here, getting the best of both worlds.
Absolutely.
Excellent. We're going to take another break here. I'm Ethan Allen, your host on Likable Science on live streaming network on ThinkTech Hawaii. And my guest here in the studio is Mike Usmar, and our guests on Skype from Studio Shaka in Hilo are Kris and John Thatcher. We'll be back shortly.
We want to thank our underwriters. Hawaiian Electric Company and its affiliates Maui Electric on Maui and Hawaii Electric Light Company on Hawaii Island are deeply committed to the communities they serve.
Galen Ho is a senior executive of BAE Systems, a global defense, security, and aerospace company.
The High-Tech Development Corporation, the state's leading technology agency, attached to the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism.
Castle and Cook Hawaii, with a time-honored legacy that spans more than 160 years and revolves around its mission of investing in Hawaii, creating communities, and providing for the needs of our state.
Hawaii Gas, formerly the Gas Company, a proponent of the Liquefied Natural Gas Initiative, helping Hawaii achieve its transition to clean energy and a better energy future.
Collateral Analytics, a Hawaii-based tech company empowering the real estate industry with greater and faster access to the tools and data they need to make better informed property investment decisions.
I'm Nicole Horry. Thanks so much for joining us on ThinkTech.
I'm Maria Kashem. See you next time.
And we're back with Likable Science here on ThinkTech Hawaii, trying to help people better understand how science, technology, engineering, math, and I guess resources and arts, making stream now, are all connected to our lives, fascinating parts of everyone's daily life. And with me in the studio here is Mike Usmar, and joining us on Skype are John Thatcher and Kris from Studio Shaka in Hilo. So we've got we saw that amazing video last time, and I wanted to talk a little bit though now about some of the challenges. Mike, you brought up some of the challenges. Clearly there's a whole issue of the technology, while it has enabled this network, is still presents barriers. The bandwidth in some of these areas is very limited. How do you deal with that, and where do you see that going?
Yeah, I mean, when we get invited to come to a community for them to be connected or start sharing with the network, there's a whole pile of due diligence we do. Where can the studio be? Where's the locations? And indeed, it's not a deal breaker, but we need some decent bandwidth. And so where there is no connectivity, we will endeavour to fundraise and provide that. Now, example of that, we're just pushing play on a project in Fiji, in Suva, in a little town called Lamy Town, which is a settlement town, and by settlement we talk a squatter town, so it technically doesn't exist. And so we work very closely with the local telecommunication company there. Fortunately, that island has a fibre. It goes from Auckland right through to Hawaii. And there's a little spur that runs in. So we negotiated with the local telco company to run a spur off theirs. And so I think we're possibly going to be one of the first projects anywhere in the world that's running a fibre effectively into a dump. So that's, we don't say the community's a dump, but it's literally where the town dump was. And so it's going to have faster broadband than the local university. I don't think that's hilarious. And then we're clever. We broadcast it out on some pretty decent 802.11, so we can bounce that around a little bit around the community too. Because I think the evolution is that most of the handsets are out there are going to be Wi-Fi enabled if they're not already. So we're not buying laptops and dumping laptops into a community. A lot of that asset, actually surprisingly, is already there. All we're going to do is do the deal breaker, which is connecting them to the world and the world to them.
Excellent. There are other challenges though beyond simply the sort of technological ones, right? There are cultural challenges where cultures have certain beliefs, certain ideas. They hold closely to them. They may have great significance to them. You have to obviously work to some way to balance this public display and this archiving of these versus the privacy issues. Does that get into problems and issues?
I think for us, I mean, the expert here would be Kris for sure. So I don't want to certainly make sure that you speak of. Correct me if I'm wrong with a whole bunch of things. Is that for us? there is a very strong link to cultural knowledges and unpacking the history of the learning that goes into it before them. And so there is and then in itself becomes ethnographic science. And so where there is, where we recognize prior learning, we go through the customs of how we unpack that story. And so when a young person, and we saw this before, were creating videos that were telling the story of their lands, that they referenced that back to their elders, that they provided the opportunity there for their village elders and chiefs to talk story into that, and to almost do that citation, but all in an oral tradition, as opposed to grabbing a book off a shelf. And so we're restoring that memory, both of the conversation, and often you're having to have that conversation in language that's unique to that culture. And so a young person may need to be then to have to go back and relearn some of their language. And actually I just saw a video, we're part of a global project called Adobe Youth Voices that was submitted by a team of young videographers at a studio in Auckland in New Zealand that did exactly that. They realized that they couldn't communicate with their elders, and so they talked that out in this video. And it, I think, got selected as a prize winner for a competition that Adobe was producing. So yeah.
Wonderful. Kris, do you want to expand on any of that?
Yeah, I think what's been really exciting for our students here in Hawaii is again, like Mike was mentioning earlier, how we've been able to connect our cultures and our learners together. And it was amazing when John and I went to Aotearoa in New Zealand and spent time with the people there. We were able to experience a lot of very similar things, very similar values like aloha, and we were able to come back, share some of the experience with our students. And the thing that was really awesome, John, is we've seen some of our students actually learn some of the Maori songs that are very significant, again, culturally, and special to the people, the Maori people. And for us, that has really surprised. I mean, I was really surprised to see a lot of our Hawaiian students really embracing and honoring the Maori brothers and sisters. And again, I think it's because we've showed them some of the videos on YouTube from Macy Rika. We've also connected the studios together. Like Mike was saying, it's like that big 42-inch monitor behind us is like the window to the world. And so we're able to connect with the other studios, talk to them face to face. A lot of them are able to communicate, sing, share, dance, whatever it is. And it's been amazing to see them connect as a ohana all throughout the Pacific.
Wonderful, wonderful. That sounds like you guys are sort of actualizing this idea of a global community here.
Well, I mean, it's at the heart of Pacific people. They left their former nations and populated the Pacific, but we often talk about a word called ahika, the first fire, where they left from, and they never forget where they came from. And so for us, this is about restoring that connection as well. I mean, for us, we don't talk about a world best practice model or a world-class model that we're going to impose into a community. Our thinking is that we join with what is already existing there, with the confidence that the science and the technology and all of that is sitting in there just needs to be connected back to the world again. And then we start unleashing some of the pragmatic stuff of what it means.
Right, and this gets actually to term I've heard you use, technological fluency, to make sure that it's not just these kids know one program or even a set of programs, but that they are fluent with the technology. They can use whatever they need. They can pick up whatever part of technology and move ahead with it.
Yeah, and it's that breadth of technology too. I think the way I like to understand it too is that if you think about being fluent in a language, Professor Mitch Resnick talks about this. So I speak a limited amount of Māori, which is our Indigenous language in New Zealand. At the moment, the way I'm having to speak Māori is I first think about it in my native tongue, which is English. I think about the word in English and then I translate it into Māori. When you become digitally fluent, you're just automatically going to your indigenous tongue. All right. So when you become digitally fluent, you're almost not thinking about the mechanics, whether it's a Photoshop, whether it's a line of code. You are just fluent in the breadth of knowledge that comes in play there. And we talk about complex skills and critical thinking and all of those things that our educators want to do. But for us, that's being digitally fluent. I'd have to say that is countering, digital fluency is countering a lot of the focus now on just being digitally literate, which is a singular skill. That I'm digitally literate in math, or I'm digitally literate in engineering, but for us it's actually connected, for us scientists, while we sit in our singular type of learning, when you're talking about environmental science, it becomes a danger if you just reduce it down to that. Reducing science down to singularity of learning is convenient for educators because then we can test it. And I don't want to go too far on that controversy, and I'm not an expert in that subject, but for us it's not about testing the science, it's living the science, which is what Kris was saying.
Right. No, that I think makes sense with the current thinking in education, as far as I understand it. We're going to take another break here. I'm your host, Ethan Allen, host on Likable Science on ThinkTech Hawaii, live streaming network here. In the studio with me is Mike Usmar from High Tech Youth Network, and joining us today on Skype are John Thatcher and Kris Kua from Shaka, from Studio Shaka in Hilo. We'll be back shortly.
Aloha, I'm Nicole Horry for ThinkTech. For nearly half a century, the Hawaii Foreign Trade Zone No. 9 has brought the benefits of the Foreign Trade Zone program to Hawaii businesses and entrepreneurs. DBET, the Department of Business, Economic Development and Tourism, operates Hawaii's Foreign Trade Zone program to encourage international business and economic development. The Foreign Trade Zone's mission is to increase the amount of international trading activity in Hawaii, thereby providing employment opportunities for the residents of our island state. For more information, see ftz9.org. I'm Nicole Horry. Mahalo.
I'm not going to be mean by saying that.
We're back. I'm Ethan Allen. You're on Likable Science here with ThinkTech Hawaii live streaming network. In the studio with me today is Mike Usmar, the Chief Executive Officer from High Tech Youth Network. And joining us on Skype are John Thatcher and Kris Kua from Studio Shaka in Hilo. We've been having a lively discussion here about how High Tech Youth Network really supports connecting youth and growing cultures across the Pacific here, and it's been amazing to learn of the sort of the breadth and depth of the kinds of learning that's happening here. So I'd like to just, you've talked sometimes about testing and all, so if you're going to test High Tech Youth Network, how would you rate yourselves? How do you know when you succeed, I guess?
And that's our challenge, because we commit to this lifelong learning, so you go figure you're finding an assessment tool for that. But what we do know pretty clearly for us is that the assessment tools, the learning tools that are being imposed, particularly in Indigenous communities, fail very short of the mark of tools that are critically analysing the depth of knowledge, the authentic knowledge that sits within those communities. So our kids won't pass necessarily a test that's come out of a different context particularly well, and then we have that other dichotomy of those tests that just don't exist right now that will really capture the knowledge. An example of this, I was in a Nihihau community early last year, and one of the teachers was talking to me there at a private charter school there. She said, this kid doesn't do math, he's failing math. All he wants to do is every day sit down and make fishing nets. And I said, don't you realize that's math? He's creating the forms, he's creating patterns, and so for us, if we can capture a taxonomy of new learning around that, that really validates the learning in situ of that community. And the critical part here is that that learning is what's created the survivability of those communities. If those kids had to go and say, let's look up in the internet on the Nihio Island, which isn't going to happen, all right, how to go and open a can using a can opener, because that's the technology of the day, it's not going to happen. What is the technology that is meaningful and creating the survivability, and that they live it, and that their uncle and their auntie can talk story with them about that fishing net? So that's for us is a challenge, is that the learning and the assessment tools are not relevant to where our kids are at. And then the biggest challenge is that the current curriculum and the current set of knowledge, and particularly in the ICT, is teaching kids for jobs that don't exist yet. You know, in 5 years' time, the global economy, the broadband economy, is going to come to us whether we like it or not. And honestly, hand on heart, are we teaching our kids the skills? If we say, nope, we're going to teach you just to pass this test at the end of the school year and we're done. And so the challenge that we have is creating new learning, and yes, being scientific about it, being academically rigorous around it, making sense of it, so that we can reflectively understand the data, but most of all creating knowledge and assessment tools that are authentic, and that's where our challenge is at the moment.
Yeah, and it's a complicated challenge too, because being culturally situated, you want to empower these learners, these kids, to make a choice at some point. And if they say, I want to go back and farm the way my grandparents did, or fish in the lagoon the way my parents do, they should have that option, and they should have all the tools at their disposal to do that in traditional manners. And yet, at the same time, if they want to say, I want to go off to Stanford and become a bioengineer and find the cure for cancer, we want them to have that option too. It's a very high bar for education.
Yeah, I mean, for us, we can often be viewed that we're arguing, to be honest, that the Stanfords should come to our communities, because they might discover there's some richness and knowledge in there. And the challenge for the Stanfords, not so much us, is that they need to be brave enough to join with us in these very communities where technology now doesn't discriminate on what color skin you are, how rich you are, how poor you are, how young you are. Well, actually, that's not entirely true. We just seem to find that kids engage in technology much better than you and I, because they're early adopters, right? It's us who have to go and ask our kids, how does this work? So that's the only thing that technology seems to do really well. So all those barriers around accessibility of learning for the Stanfords and the institutions can happen anywhere in the world now. And technology again is evolving and adding to. So we think now there are greater opportunities in terms of vocational and learning pathways, not into colleges, but also creating social enterprises in situ of their own communities. So the very things that John Thatcher and Kris are talking about with the makery, they can actually create products there. I was talking with a young boy in Studio Shaka on Wednesday who's just doing early designs around creating an app online, and so exploring whether he's going to put it on Android or iOS. And I said to him, look, I know a whole bunch of kids down in a project in New Zealand that designed some apps last year. Why don't you just get online and talk to them and have a conversation around there? Because what they ended up doing was producing an app that they popped up on, an app that they can sell. And so you don't even need to leave your island now to start producing some outcomes. So there's livelihood outcomes and that'll create to your living, but now there's this whole global social enterprising opportunity that kids in the middle of nowhere can achieve.
Yeah, that's just mind-boggling, truly, that you're able to do this, and it gives us all hope. It's very inspirational for the future here. Kris, John, do you guys have thoughts to add to this?
Well, we were talking about assessment a little bit, and I think that you have to look at what are we really trying to assess, and are we using the right tools to assess? So let's say that you want to build a house. You're going to hire an architect based on the test scores that he got? No, you're going to hire an architect based on the projects that they can show you that they've completed. And so they create like a portfolio. So we really believe that authentic assessment, the kid's ability to think of a project, to design the project, to build or do the project. We have kids at our school that come to Studio Shaka from 30, 35 miles away and they basically live in a house that's on hard, solid lava. Well, now this kid decides, well, I'd like to grow some taro and I'd like to raise some fish at my house. Well, they can use the makery to try to develop an aquaponics system where they can use the technology to do something that solves a problem in their life. And I think that's what we really have to get towards, is that performance-based assessments and how do we rate the projects that the kids work on. And so to me, that's very exciting. You know, if you're going to give the kids the skills that for the jobs of the future that we really don't know about, well, the skill that we can develop right now is their ability to think through, create, and then to present. So a lot of our kids have a hard time talking in public. Well, we give them an opportunity. The two boys that did the historic sites in Hilo project, those are two of the shyest boys in the school. And you wouldn't have known that. Mike probably didn't know that. So they were talking, they were so motivated to share their project that they overcame their inhibitions and their fears of public speaking.
Well, wonderful, wonderful. This has been a beautiful, rich conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I've learned a ton from this. And I want to thank all of you. I want to thank my guests here from Studio Shaka in Hilo, John and Kris. You guys are doing amazing work there, and I wish you the best of luck. I look forward to learning more about it as it goes on. And I want to thank Mike Usmar here, who's the CEO of High Tech Youth Network and has been my guest in the studio today for a very informative conversation, very enjoyable one. I'm your host, Ethan Allen. We're signing off from Likable Science, High Tech High Tech Network. Sorry.